Margaret had always considered her home a safe place, a place where laughter and warmth filled the rooms whenever her daughter Emily came to visit. She loved Emily fiercely and had always wanted the best for her. So when Emily introduced Ryan as her husband, Margaret had been cautiously optimistic. Ryan was polite, charming, and seemingly attentive, someone who fit into the family with ease. At first, Margaret was relieved. Emily was happy, and he seemed to genuinely care for her. Life was settling into a comfortable rhythm. But over the last few months, something had started to seem off. Margaret couldn't quite place it at first. Little moments that made her pause, an uneasy tension she couldn't shake. It was subtle, just a glance that held too long, or a smile that seemed almost too familiar. Then came the comments, seemingly innocent, but strangely pointed. Compliments about her appearance that were inappropriate. Margaret tried to dismiss it, telling herself she might be imagining things. She loved her daughter. The last thing she wanted was to see problems where none existed. The night it all came to a head began like any other rainy evening. Emily had gone out to run errands, leaving Margaret and Ryan alone in the house. The rain pattered gently against the windows, creating a quiet atmosphere. Margaret had been in the kitchen preparing tea when Ryan followed her in. They talked about small things at first: the weather, Emily's plans, family updates, but there was an undercurrent Margaret couldn't ignore. Ryan's tone was different that night. It was softer, more deliberate, and when he leaned closer to point something out on the counter, Margaret experienced a shiver run down her spine. The space between them seemed charged, and his gaze held in a way that made her uncomfortable. She moved back slightly, forcing herself to focus on the tea. She wanted to keep calm, to not overreact, but deep inside, a warning bell was ringing. This was not normal behavior. Then came the words. A whisper almost inaudible over the rain, but clear enough to make her heart pound. Ryan said something that should never have been said, something that crossed a line no son-in-law should ever approach. Margaret froze, her mind racing. Shock, disbelief, and anger collided inside her. She had always thought of Ryan as family, but suddenly, he seemed like a stranger, someone unpredictable and dangerous. Her frame tensed, every instinct screaming at her to act, to put him in his place. Margaret realized she had a choice. She could ignore it, hope Emily wouldn't notice, and pretend everything was fine. She could stay silent, as many would, and let the discomfort fester. Or she could confront him, risk a confrontation, and assert her boundaries. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, not just for herself, but for Emily. Her daughter trusted her completely, and Margaret knew that if she failed to act, it could damage the family forever. She decided she had to take control. The calm Margaret had cultivated all these years was replaced with determination. She needed to assert herself to make Ryan understand that what he had done was unacceptable, but she also needed to do it carefully. Emily's safety and emotional well-being were her top priorities. Margaret couldn't let fear cloud her judgment. As Ryan continued to talk, Margaret kept her voice steady. She forced herself to maintain composure. Even though every word he spoke seemed designed to test her limits, her mind raced, thinking through what she would say, how she would make him understand the severity of crossing a line. She had to be firm but not cruel, stern but not reckless. Every decision mattered. The tension between them grew. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows, echoing the turmoil inside the room. Margaret sensed her pulse quicken. This was a moment that would define the dynamic of their relationship moving forward. She knew that if she faltered, Ryan might see it as an opportunity, might push boundaries even further, authority with restraint. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally, but she knew it had been necessary not just for Emily, but for herself as well. This confrontation was a reminder that boundaries must be enforced, that respect cannot be assumed, and that even those we trust the most can sometimes be tested in ways we never expect. She sat down by the window later, watching the rain streak the glass. The world outside seemed ordinary, calm even. But Margaret knew that her internal world had shifted. Something in the dynamic with Ryan had changed forever. While Emily would never know the full story, Margaret carried it like a quiet secret, a burden that reminded her of the fragility of trust and the responsibility of protecting the one she loved. Margaret understood that the haunting part of the situation was not just the confrontation itself, but the knowledge of what could have happened if she had failed to act. The tension between attraction, temptation, and moral boundaries was a delicate line that once crossed could have devastating consequences. She experienced the weight of that understanding settle within her, a constant reminder of the thin barrier between right and wrong in human relationships. As night fell, Margaret tried to rest, but sleep came fitfully. Her thoughts circled back to Ryan, to the confrontation, and to the emotional intensity of the moment. She realized that even though she had acted decisively, the memory of that day would remain, quietly influencing her perceptions and her interactions. Some moments, she understood, leave permanent marks, not visible scars, but echoes that shape the heart and mind, long after the event itself. By the following morning, Margaret had returned to her daily routine, preparing for Emily's return with a careful balance of normalcy and remaining tension. She smiled, spoke, and moved through the house as if nothing had happened. But inside, she carried the shadow of that confrontation. It was a quiet, heavy awareness, a constant companion reminding her that boundaries must be defended, that respect must be demanded, and that the consequences of human desire are never far from reach. Margaret knew that what she had done, firm and decisive, was necessary. Yet she also understood that the emotional impact would remain. Some lessons are learned through confrontation, some through courage, and some through facing uncomfortable truths. For Margaret, the encounter with Ryan had been all three. She had protected Emily, asserted her authority, and enforced boundaries. But she also realized that the haunting part, the echo of tension, the memory of what could have been, would stay with her every day, quietly shaping her perspective on family, trust, and human complexity. Weeks passed since that rainy afternoon, and Margaret tried to settle back into the rhythms of everyday life. Emily returned to her normal schedule. Ryan seemed polite and distant during family gatherings, and outwardly everything appeared calm. Margaret reminded herself that the danger had passed, that she had acted decisively, protected her daughter, and set clear boundaries. Yet inside, the echoes of that confrontation continued to stir. The tension from that day didn't vanish. It remained in quiet moments, in flashes of memory, in the way she sometimes experienced a pang of unease whenever Ryan entered a room. Margaret tried to focus on her routines. She took long walks in the morning, tended to her garden, and spent hours cooking meals that filled the house with familiar smells. Yet, even in these ordinary moments, her mind returned to that afternoon. She replayed every detail. Ryan's soft tone, the subtle shift in his expression when she spoke firmly, the tension that had made her pulse quicken. It was not a pleasant memory, but she could not dismiss it. The moment had left a mark, a quiet imprint that would not fade easily. Emily remained blissfully unaware of the intensity of what had occurred. She laughed, chatted, and spoke of daily life. And Margaret experienced relief each time she saw her daughter, happy and untouched by the storm that had passed. But the contrast between Emily's lightheartedness and the shadow Margaret carried made the weight inside her even more pronounced. She realized that sometimes being the guardian of a secret comes with its own silent responsibility to navigate life carefully, to protect others while carrying the echo alone. Ryan, on his part, had become noticeably more restrained. He greeted Margaret with polite smiles, kept conversations neutral, and avoided any hint of the prior tension. Margaret appreciated the change, yet a part of her remained wary. She knew human behavior could be unpredictable, and boundaries once tested might be tested again. She could not allow herself to be lulled into a false sense of security. The lesson of that day had been clear. Vigilance and awareness are crucial, even when everything appears calm. One evening, Margaret found herself sitting by the window, watching the sunset streak the sky in gold and crimson. The beauty of the moment contrasted sharply with the storm that still raged quietly inside her. She thought about the decisions she had made, the courage it had taken to confront Ryan, and the sharpness of the emotions she had experienced. Fear, anger, disappointment, and even a strange, uncomfortable curiosity all had merged in that confrontation. She had acted decisively, but the emotional residue remained, haunting her quietly. Margaret also reflected on the nature of human desire and the fragility of trust. Ryan had been charming, polite, and attractive in many ways, and she realized that the potential for misjudgment existed, even in those we consider safe. That understanding did not bring her fear, but a somber awareness. Boundaries, respect, and moral courage were not abstract concepts. They were the shields that protected her family and herself. And yet, she understood that even the right actions leave a mark. The memory of that confrontation was like a faint echo in a quiet room, soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakable and impossible to ignore. At times, Margaret found herself thinking about what could have happened if she had failed to act. The what-ifs were a silent shadow that followed her, a quiet haunting that reminded her of the delicate balance between courage and inaction. She understood now that acting decisively, even in uncomfortable circumstances, is essential. But she also recognized that the cost of such actions is not always visible. There is a lingering weight that sits quietly in the heart, reminding one of the fragile lines between right and wrong, love and betrayal, desire and restraint. Despite the haunting thoughts, Margaret noticed something else emerging: unexpected resilience. Each time she recalled the confrontation, she experienced a quiet pride in her own strength, in her ability to act without losing her composure, and in her unwavering commitment to protect Emily. The haunting aspect was still there, yes, but it had shifted slightly. It became a reminder not only of what was dangerous, but also of what she was capable of. The courage, firmness, and moral clarity she possessed when circumstances demanded it. Life continued. But Margaret carried the memory like a private companion. She observed Ryan carefully during family dinners, noticing the small changes in his demeanor. There was no longer the subtle tension of inappropriate attraction, no held glances that made her uncomfortable. Instead, there was a polite distance, a recognition of boundaries, and a cautious respect. Margaret allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief each time she observed this change. The danger had receded, but the awareness remained. Margaret's nights, however, were still restless. Sometimes she would lie awake and replay the words, the gestures, and the tension of that rainy afternoon. It was not fear or regret that kept her awake. It was the gravity of human emotions, the complexity of trust, and the remaining traces of what might have happened. She realized that some moments in life leave an indelible impression, shaping perception and understanding in ways that cannot be erased. The confrontation with Ryan was one such moment, a defining event that would echo quietly in her heart for years. Over time, Margaret found ways to cope with the lingering haunting. She poured herself into hobbies, deepened friendships, and focused on Emily's happiness. Yet even in moments of laughter and joy, the memory remained not as a source of pain, but as a quiet reminder of the importance of vigilance, self-respect, and moral courage. She understood that what she had done, though difficult, was necessary, and that her actions had protected her daughter and upheld the values she held dear. Margaret also reflected on the nature of family and the invisible threads that connect people. Trust is fragile, boundaries are essential, and love sometimes requires difficult, uncomfortable choices. She knew she had acted correctly, but the experience had taught her the depth of human complexity. The echo of that afternoon was a reminder that even in ordinary lives, extraordinary challenges can appear, demanding courage, decisiveness, and clarity of heart. And so life continued. Emily laughed. Ryan respected boundaries, and the household returned to a routine that appeared peaceful and normal to anyone outside. Yet Margaret carried the quiet haunting within her, a shadow that followed her through everyday moments, through quiet mornings and busy afternoons. It was not a source of despair, but a constant awareness, a reminder of the delicate balance between protection and vulnerability, love and caution, desire and restraint. In the end, Margaret realized that some decisions, even when right, leave a lasting mark. Her confrontation with Ryan had been necessary, moral, and decisive. Yet the emotional residue could not be erased. The haunting was not a punishment. It was a testament to the gravity of human relationships, the importance of vigilance, and the courage required to protect the ones we love. Every day as she navigated life, Margaret carried this awareness quietly, a shadow of strength and responsibility that would remain with her forever. The story of that rainy afternoon, the confrontation and the remaining tension became a part of her life. It shaped her understanding of trust, respect, and human desire. It reminded her that boundaries are essential, courage is necessary, and even the right actions leave traces in the heart. And as Margaret moved through each day, she knew one thing for certain. She had acted correctly, but the haunting echo of that moment would follow her, always quietly shaping the woman she was, the mother she remained, and the guardian she had become.